Performing in a marching percussion ensemble is an exciting musical experience. But in order to get the full benefit from the experience, you must approach it with a certain level of discipline. Since the activity involves both how you look as well as how you sound, you've got to pay close attention to every aspect of your technique and hand positions, as well as the actual notes that you play. This videotape will teach you performance techniques used in each section of the ensemble: snares, quads, basses, and cymbals. Play along with the tape and spend a lot of time playing from the book that came with the tape. Numerous repetitions of each exercise is the best way to learn a specific technique. Also, realize that the sooner you master the material on this tape, the sooner you'll be able to enjoy the experience of a high-quality performance with a drumline. Remember, concentration, attention to detail, and lots of repetition. These three things, coupled with the material on this tape, will help you to achieve your highest level of playing. The quickest and easiest grip to use is matched grip. Simply hold the stick between the thumb and the forefinger, keeping the thumb parallel to the stick. This is called your fulcrum. Now, wrap the rest of your fingers around the stick. Keep the fingers on the stick at all times, but don't use a death grip with those back fingers. Just keep them lightly around the stick. Now, the arm, hand, and stick position is important for a visual reason as well as a performance reason. Since all of the players in any given section should look alike, it's very important that each player uses the same positioning. A symmetrical approach is best. When you put the sticks over the drum head, keep the backs of the hands facing up, and position the sticks so that they form a nice wide V. Now you'll be in perfect playing position. Also, keep your elbows an equal distance from your body. This will look symmetrical. And elevate your wrists slightly, letting the sticks angle downward to the drum head. This will help your rolls and will look nice from the front, allowing the audience to see the sticks better. The wrist stroke is the primary stroke you should use in your playing. As you make the stroke, just think of raising the tip of the stick, bend at the wrist, and hit the drum. Try to not use any arm in your single stroke playing. There are three basic types of wrist strokes you need to learn. The first is the downstroke. Bend at the wrist to raise the stick, and immediately after you hit the drum, squeeze the stick with the back fingers. This will stop the stick very close to the head, not allowing the stick to rebound back up. The second type of stroke is the upstroke. Again, bend at the wrist to raise the stick. After you hit the drum, let the stick rebound back up. You may have to assist the rebound by actually raising the stick with your wrist after you hit the drum. The final stroke is called a tap. Now, a tap is just a small note that's played with the wrist. Taps are most easily identified as the notes in between accents. The next three exercises combine these three strokes. An important thing to notice is the stick heights that are used. Your accented notes should be played about 10 inches above the head, and your unaccented notes, or taps, should be played only about 4 or 5 inches high. This will look great if everyone in the section is doing it the same, but it will also sound great by letting the accents stand out so that they can be heard. secret to playing flams correctly is to not raise the grace note. Start with correct positioning, raise the tip of the right stick, and in one motion, play a right hand downstroke while playing a small grace note from the left hand position. Don't raise the left stick to play the grace note. Notice how the grace note stick is not raised. It's simply played from its rest position about 1 inch from the head. The only stick that is raised is the stick playing the primary note of the flam. Sticking flam passages is always a problem. With the exception of some of the rudiments like Swiss triplets and flam taps, which you should take the time to learn, most of the flam passages you'll play will use alternating strokes. The best rudiment to use to learn this concept is the flam accent. It's simply triplets played with alternating strokes, like this. Now, put an accent on the first note of each of those triplets, like this. And now make each of those accent notes into flams, like this. This is the most useful flam rudiment there is. You can play an unlimited number of flam accent patterns using this rudiment. Here are 2 exercises using flams and alternating strokes. Most of your rolls in the marching percussion activity are going to be open rolls, and the majority of those rolls are going to be based on a 16th note hand motion. Let's start by learning a technique used in playing 32nd note diddles. Here's what I mean. 16th notes will be the basic strokes you'll be playing. The slash through the stem of a 16th note means to let the stick bounce twice on that 16th note stroke. The 2 notes created are 32nd notes, and these 2 notes are called a diddle. To play a diddle, you first make a stroke, but instead of stopping the stick after 1 note, you let the stick rebound and hit the drum a 2nd time. In order for this to sound right, you need to control that 2nd note. You can do this by using a release-squeeze technique. As you make the initial stroke, release the pressure with the back fingers slightly. This allows the stick to rebound back up. Then, to make the 2nd note of the diddle, simply squeeze the back fingers. Notice that this is not a let-go, grab kind of motion, but a release-squeeze motion. Now, there's one other thing that you can do to give your diddles a more full, even sound, and that is add in some arm to each diddle stroke. If your taps are this high, let's say, during the 16th notes, add about 1 inch or so to the diddle stroke by bending at the elbow. In other words, let your arm assist in the making of the stroke, like this. This will add a slight pulse to each diddle, but that's okay. As you play more diddles in a row, or in other words a roll, it will give you a much more full, even, and powerful sound. Now, as you study and play these roll exercises, realize that you're only playing 16th notes. In order to play the various patterns, you simply diddle certain 16th note strokes. Visuals are a fun way to add flash and hipness to a performance. The possibilities are limitless for visuals, but remember that the more simple and succinct the visual, the more effective it is. In this next performance, you'll see some different visuals that work well for the snare line, as well as a demonstration of some of the various techniques that I've talked about. The grip used in playing quads or any multi-tom setup is matched grip. This is the same grip that I talked about in the snare drum segment of the tape. Grip the sticks between the thumb and the forefinger. This is your fulcrum. Now, wrap the rest of your fingers around the stick, but don't squeeze too tight with the back fingers. Just keep them lightly around the stick. The hand and arm positions are also very similar to snare drum. The backs of the hands are facing up. The elbows are a symmetrical distance from the body, but the stick should form a tighter V when held over the drums. This will help with the movement around the drums, especially in the faster passages. The strokes you will use are, again, just like on snare drum. You should use wrist strokes on all of the single beat passages. The basic wrist strokes are the down stroke, the up stroke, and the tap. Remember that taps are just little notes. Now, the main technical problem associated with playing quads is moving around the drums. This is done with a lateral motion of the arms while keeping good hand positions. As you move around the drums, notice that it is the arms that get you from drum to drum, not the wrists. Also, notice that the positioning of the beads of the mallets change their relative position to one another as you move from drum to drum. This changing of positions that the beads go through relates to the beating spots on the drum, or where you should hit on the drum head. You can get different sounds by hitting the drum at different spots on the head. For instance, the center of the drum head produces a very dry, dead sound, but playing about halfway between the center and the edge produces more tone and ring. What's most important is that whatever sound you choose to go for, that sound should be consistent from drum to drum. As you move around the drums, be sure to keep the beads of the mallets hitting an equal distance from the rim. Also, notice that the beating spots of all the drums are basically in a straight line. This makes playing the drums much easier. Figuring out how to stick a certain passage is another problem for tenor players. There are basically 3 ways to stick things. Hand to hand is the easiest. If the part is written in such a way that the notes lead from drum to drum and hand to hand, you've got it made. Here are some examples. the passage does not lead from drum to drum easily, you can choose from two other techniques. The first is called a crossover. Simply cross one hand over the other to reach the next drum. When crossing over, make sure you maintain the proper beating spots. Also, try to keep good hand positions while executing the crossover. The other technique you should master is double sticking. The simplest form of double sticking to get around the drums is in using paradiddles. The sticking for paradiddles, right, left, 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 has a built-in double sticking. This can get you from one drum to the next without a crossover. In that last exercise, you saw some open rolls being played. This is becoming more and more common in tenor writing. The same techniques used in playing rolls on snare drum applies to the rolls on tenors. The only difference is that you must also use the lateral arm motion while playing the rolls. Now, visuals can be very effective in the tenor section as well as in the snare section. But, as I mentioned before, the simpler the visual, the better. In this next performance, you'll see a few examples of tenor visuals along with some of each of the techniques that I've talked about in this segment of the tape. The grip used for bass drums is, of course, matched grip. However, when it comes to hand, arm, and stick positions, the most important factor is the positioning of the drum itself. This is good positioning for a bass drum. Notice that the drum is high enough so that when the player plays in the center of the drum, the arms are basically parallel to the ground and the sticks are angled slightly upward. If the drums are carried in this position, the section will look great. The drums will be much easier to play correctly and the pitches will project much better. Now, The basic strokes used on bass drum are the downstroke, the upstroke, and the tap. These have all been discussed earlier, but what we do need to talk about are beating spots. Now, just like with quads, you can get different tone qualities by playing at different spots on the head. There are two different beating spots that I like to use. The center of the head produces a tone comprised mainly of the fundamental of the pitch. It also produces a great deal of impact and punch, so for these reasons we use this beating spot primarily for accents and unison passages. Now, you're going to notice my bass line is using stands instead of harnesses. I like to use this approach in rehearsal situations as much as possible to save the players' backs. The hand positions are not quite the same as when the players are wearing the drums, but the comfort factor far outweighs that. When you play slightly above the center of the head, you get more overtones and a more beautiful sound. This spot works well for split melodic passages. By making choices about when to use which beating spot, you'll be getting the most musical sound from the bass line. Learning to play these split melodic parts is the trickiest thing for a bass line to do. The secret to playing a smooth, flowing split part is for each player to know his individual part and to know how it fits with the rest of the section. Try to not use other people's notes as a cue for your notes. If you do, your note will be late, it's almost guaranteed. Know your notes, play your notes, but know how your part fits with the composite part. Now, here are 5 exercises for developing split parts. These exercises range from very simple to very complex. Don't be afraid to start with the simple ones at first. Then, as you get better, progress to the more difficult ones. As you watch this next performance, be thinking about all of the concepts and techniques that I've talked about. Remember that the days of just beating the drum on every quarter note to keep time for the band are over. The bass drum section has more demands placed on it today than ever before, both technical demands as well as musical demands. Take the time to learn this approach to bass drumming and adopt an attitude that will help you to be not just time whackers, but a contributing musical section of the ensemble. The most comfortable way to hold the cymbals is also the best way to control the position of the cymbals. Put your hand through the strap from the top, then simply turn your hand upwards so that the strap lays between the thumb and the forefinger. This method of holding the cymbals causes the least amount of hand and finger fatigue and enables you to have total control over the angle of the plates at all times. The cymbal section can be the most visually impactful section in the drum line. But as always, attention to detail will pay off. The at-rest position should include good posture with the cymbals at the player's side. Notice that the cymbals are being controlled, held in a strict vertical position. The movement to crash position should be done with a snappy motion. And the crash position itself should be up in front of the player's face. This is mainly for visual impact. A simple spin can also be added to this motion, further enhancing the effect. Getting from the rest position to the hi-hat type position is a little trickier, since the cymbals have to be put together to be played. This motion should be also done with as much snap as possible. There are several methods for playing the crash. Some of them actually produce different sounds. But for our purposes here, we're going to talk about the basic forward crash. The crash position, as you saw earlier, is with the cymbals up in front of the player's face, with the cymbals angled slightly inward at the top. To perform the crash, simply move the right cymbal inward toward the left cymbal. The top of the cymbals will make contact first, and as soon as the tops make contact, thrust both hands inward and then immediately pull them apart as if to let the sound out. This crash method is obviously for a loud note. Whatever you do, make sure these two things don't happen. Number one, don't come in with both hands from the side like this. It sounds bad and it looks terrible. I have a friend, his name is Carl, and that's how he plays. This is the very first thing I think of when I see people playing cymbals the wrong way. Trust me, that's what you don't want to look like. And the second thing, don't make totally flat, even contact with the cymbals around the circumference. This can create an air pocket, and if this happens, you don't get any sound from the crash, but even worse, the cymbals can actually suction together. And then there you are, out there on the field with your cymbals stuck together. Pretty embarrassing. Now, the soft crash is a whole other story. The soft crash is tricky because you need to position the cymbals very close together before the note. For a very soft note, the cymbals should be about 1 inch apart, evenly around the circumference. Move the right cymbal in toward the left cymbal, trying to make contact evenly around the circumference. Now, since the force of the motion is much less here than in the loud crash, you don't have to worry about the cymbals sticking together. The louder the note needs to be, the more of an angle the cymbals should be held at, and the more force and quicker motion you use to make the note. Since the cymbals will ring for some time after a crash, you sometimes need to muffle them in order to correspond to the music being played. To muffle a note, bring the cymbals into your body, just inside your shoulders, at the appropriate time after the note. Take care when you're muffling that you don't injure yourself by bringing them in too hard. Make musical decisions throughout your show about where and when to muffle, mark it in the music, and learn the mufflings at the same time that you learn the notes. The hi-hat effect is used quite a bit in today's music. I call these notes chucks because that's kind of what they sound like. An angled position for the chucks seems to be the most comfortable for the players. To play the notes, open and close the cymbals at the front edge like a clamshell. Keep the edges of the cymbals lined up for the best sound and put enough energy into the motion so the sound is tight, crisp, and will project. The choke note is an effect similar to a splash cymbal on a drum set that is hit and then muffled quickly. All you do to play a choke is to play a crash, let the cymbal speak for just a second, and then muffle quickly. There are many visuals that can be done with the cymbal section. This next performance will demonstrate the techniques we've discussed along with several visuals that I use. All of the exercises and demonstrations you've seen here have taken hours and hours of practice and preparation. Remember, concentration, attention to detail, and lots of repetition, coupled with a real commitment on your part, will help you to achieve your highest level of playing possible.